I don't remember the impact. No clean, cinematic moment where everything slows down and you understand what's about to happen. I remember weather that felt wrong for driving, gray light flattening the world, my windshield wipers working too hard, and my own voice in my head insisting I could still make good time if I just stayed alert. Then there was the sound of glass, and a brief, impossible sensation like the road reached up and grabbed the car by the ankles. After that, what I remember most is quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like my brain had been shoved underwater. Sound came in pieces, a dull ringing, then the distant chirp of something electronic, then voices that felt like they were happening in another room. I tried to open my eyes and my eyelids didn't cooperate, like they belonged to somebody else. I tried to swallow and my throat wouldn't do what it was told. The air smelled sharp and clean in a way that made me think of offices and disinfectant, and underneath it there was something metallic I couldn't place at first, until I realized it was my own mouth. And in that fog of beeps and pressure, and a body that wouldn't answer, I latched onto one stupid, small thing like it was a life raft. My mom's voicemail. 2 days ago. Her name on my screen. The little notification I ignored while I merged onto another highway, while I sipped coffee, while I told myself I'd listen when I parked. I hadn't even been mad or cold about it. I'd just been busy in the way people say when they really mean. I assumed there would be more time. Just picture that for a second. Your body barely working, the world reduced to sound and light, and the loudest regret in your head isn't money, or work, or even the crash itself. It's one message you didn't bother to hear. Before the wreck, my life was basically measured in miles and minutes, and I didn't even realize how proud I was of that until it got ripped away. I was 29, a sales rep for a regional equipment company, and the job was simple on paper: drive, pitch, close, repeat. But the way I did it turned it into a whole identity, like I was proving something every time I beat traffic or squeezed in one more stop before dark. My car wasn't just transportation. It was my office, my dining room, my decompression chamber, my little moving bubble where I controlled everything. I had a charger always plugged in, a cooler with energy drinks, protein bars shoved in the console, and a rotation of podcasts that made me feel like I was learning, even when I was just distracting myself. My calendar was packed the way a suitcase gets packed when you refuse to check a bag, tight, overstuffed, and one bad bump away from exploding. I told people I liked the freedom, and I did, in a shallow way. I liked that no one watched me at a desk. I liked that I could stop at a gas station, get a coffee, and feel like I was still moving towards something. I liked telling my friends I was on the road, like that meant I was important. But the truth is, I used motion as an excuse to be emotionally unavailable without looking like a jerk. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't some villain ignoring my family on purpose. I just kept everything polite and delayed. My mom would call and I'd see it, and I'd think, I'll call her back when I'm not driving. My dad would text something simple: drive safe. Weather looks bad. And I'd send a quick thumbs up, like that counted as connection. I even had this habit of letting voicemails pile up because listening felt like a commitment. If I listened, I might have to respond with more than, "I'm busy." I might have to hear something in my mom's voice that required me to slow down and be present. So I told myself I was being efficient. I told myself I'd handle it later, when the day calmed down, when the quarter ended, when my schedule cleared. Have you ever done that thing where you postpone a person the way you postpone laundry? Like they'll just sit there neatly folded in your mind until you're ready? That was me. I kept my love in the later pile, and I acted like it was responsible. And the scary part is, it didn't feel like neglect. It felt like ambition. The first warnings didn't show up like a flashing red light. They came like small inconveniences I treated as normal, because normal was whatever kept me moving. It started with fatigue that didn't match the work. I'd wake up in a hotel room and feel like I'd already been awake for hours. I'd shower, and the hot water would help for 5 minutes. Then the heaviness would settle back into my shoulders like a wet jacket. In the car, I'd crank the air cold, slap my cheeks at stoplights, chew mint gum like it had magic in it, and tell myself I just needed a better night's sleep. But sleep was always negotiable to me. If I had a 7:30 meeting and the drive was long, I'd go to bed late and call it hustle. If I finished a day and still had 2 follow-up calls to make, I'd make them from the parking lot instead of inside my room, because it felt weak to stop. I lived on caffeine that stopped being a boost and started being a life support system. I told myself it was temporary, just a season, just the grind. Then I started having these tiny lapses that scared me more than I wanted to admit. A song would end, and I wouldn't remember the last 2 minutes of driving. I'd look down and realize I'd been gripping the steering wheel too hard, my forearms tense like I'd been bracing for something. Once, I drifted slightly onto the rumble strip, and the vibration jolted me awake so sharply my heart kicked in my chest, and I laughed out loud like it was funny, like it wasn't terrifying. I became weirdly irritated by small things. Slow drivers felt personal. Rain felt like an insult. A detour sign felt like the universe disrespecting my schedule. I'd catch myself talking back to the GPS, as if the voice was a coworker who didn't understand how important I was. Looking back, that irritability was fear wearing a mask. My body was telling me to slow down, and my ego kept translating it as annoyance. That week, the weather got serious. The kind of warnings that make normal people change plans. Forecasts talking about freezing rain, reduced visibility, avoid unnecessary travel. My mom texted me something simple. She always did, asking if I could just call her when I had a second. My dad's message came through too, and it was so practical it almost made me roll my eyes. Roads might be bad tomorrow. Don't push it. I told them both the same thing I always did. Short, confident, dismissive in a friendly way. I said I'd be careful. I said I was fine. I said I'd call later. And later came and went, because later in my life was basically a storage unit where I shoved anything that required a heart. The night before the crash, I remember standing in a hotel hallway under harsh fluorescent lights, my bag cutting into my shoulder, and feeling this sudden, hollow thought. If I stopped moving, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. Try to feel that for a moment. Being so used to speed that stillness feels like danger. That was my decline. Not just physical tiredness, but this weird addiction to motion that made every warning feel like something I could outwork. The morning of the crash started like every other bad weather morning I'd ever talked myself through. I woke up, checked the forecast, and felt that little sting of annoyance, like the sky was being inconvenient on purpose. Outside my hotel window, everything looked washed out and cold, the world reduced to gray and white, and the slick shine of parking lot pavement. I could have pushed my meetings. I could have called my boss and said, "Roads are dangerous. I'm rescheduling." I even had the perfect excuse sitting right there, printed across every weather app in bold warnings. But I'd built my entire identity around being the guy who shows up anyway, the guy who doesn't lose momentum, the guy who can handle it. So I did what I always did. I grabbed coffee that was too hot and tasted like burnt metal. I threw my bag into the passenger seat. I set my phone in its mount like it was a trusted co-pilot. I hit the highway while it was still early enough that the day hadn't warmed up, early enough that the roads were at their sneakiest. At first it was just wet. Then it became that kind of slick where you don't feel the danger until you're already inside it. The traffic was moving, but not confidently. Everyone had that cautious spacing, that subtle, collective tension. The sky was low and heavy, and the light made everything look flat, like you couldn't judge distance properly. My wipers squeaked. My shoulders stayed up by my ears. I remember telling myself little lies that sounded like logic. I'm experienced. I've driven in worse. I'm paying attention. I turned the podcast off, like silence was a safety measure. I sat a little straighter. I kept both hands on the wheel, like that alone could negotiate with physics. Then the fatigue hit me in this soft, sneaky way that still makes me angry when I think about it. Not like a dramatic head drop, not like I fell asleep in a way you'd picture on TV. It was more like my mind kept trying to blink, like my attention would dim for half a second, then flare back up. Micro sleeps, they call it later, like giving it a neat label makes it less terrifying. I caught myself staring too long at the taillights ahead. I'd realized my eyes weren't tracking details, just color. Red, red, red. And somewhere in the back of my brain there was a thought that tried to rise up and save me. Pull off. Take a break. Stop being stupid. But I swatted it down the way I swatted down everything that threatened my schedule. It happened fast, and it happened slow. One moment I was behind a line of cars, all of us sliding along the highway like cautious ants. The next moment there was a change. Maybe someone tapped brakes. Maybe someone hit a slick patch and corrected too hard. Maybe I drifted just enough to lose the clean grip I thought I had. I don't even know, because the exact change doesn't matter as much as the truth underneath it. The road didn't care who I thought I was. My tires lost traction with a sickening smoothness, like the car had suddenly turned into something floating. The steering wheel felt light in my hands, and that was the moment my stomach dropped, because I understood in one clear flash that I was no longer driving. I was a passenger inside my own momentum. There was a sound, rubber sliding, maybe, and then the hard slap of something. The seatbelt grabbed me so tight it knocked the breath out of my lungs. The airbags went off with a violent burst that filled the cabin with dust and the smell of chemicals, and for a second my entire world was white and loud and close. Then the spinning. Not a dramatic spiral where you see the world rotating like a carnival ride. It was disorienting, fragmented. Glimpses of guardrail. Glimpses of sky. A violent jolt that snapped my head sideways. The taste of something sharp and metallic on my tongue. Glass like glitter scattering across the dashboard. I tried to breathe, and it felt like my chest wasn't sure how. My ears rang so hard it was like the world had been replaced with a high, thin whistle. I remember thinking, absurdly, I have to call someone. Like the part of my brain that managed schedules and logistics was still trying to do its job. I reached for my phone, and my hand didn't do what I told it to. My fingers felt clumsy and far away. I blinked and blinked, trying to clear the fog, trying to understand where I was. The car was stopped at an angle that didn't make sense. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks. The air inside was thick with that powdery smell. Somewhere outside, other cars slowed, and I saw shapes moving through the blur. A door opened. Maybe mine, maybe someone else's, and cold air rushed in like a slap. Voices came in next, muffled and urgent, but not panicked. That's what I remember most about the people who showed up. They sounded calm, like they'd trained their own fear into a tool. Someone told me not to move. Someone asked me my name. Someone asked me if I knew where I was. I tried to answer and my voice came out wrong. Thin, broken, like it belonged to a much younger version of me. And then, in the middle of that chaos, my mind did something strange. It grabbed onto a detail that wasn't even in front of me. My mom's voicemail icon. The little notification I'd ignored. Her name sitting there like an unopened letter. Have you ever had your brain pick the most inconvenient moment to show you the thing you've been dodging? That's what it felt like. The crash hadn't even finished happening, and already my regret was louder than my pain. The last clear thing I remember is being moved, careful hands, a hard surface under my back, straps across my chest. The sky above me was the color of dirty snow. Someone leaned in close, and I could see their breath in the cold air as they told me to keep my eyes open. I tried. I really tried. But the world narrowed anyway, and the sound of voices stretched out like tape slowing down, and then everything went dark. Not dramatic, not peaceful, just gone. Like someone flipped a switch and my body finally took the break I refused to take on my own. The first thing I remember after the darkness isn't a memory the way you tell it at a dinner table. It's more like fragments my brain stitched together later, like it was trying to make meaning out of noise and pressure and drugs. There were beeps that felt steady and indifferent, like a metronome counting time I didn't control. There were voices floating above me, sometimes close, sometimes far, and I couldn't always tell if they were talking to me or around me. There was a constant hum, machines, air vents, footsteps, the quiet machinery of a place built for emergencies. And underneath all of it, there was this heavy, drugged fog where thoughts didn't form cleanly. They surfaced like bubbles, popped, then vanished. But one thought kept coming back, stubborn as a bruise you can't stop pressing. That voicemail. It wasn't even playing. I wasn't hearing my mom's words. It was the idea of it, the fact that it existed and I had treated it like a notification instead of a person. The way her name had sat on my screen for 2 days while I chased numbers like they were the only thing that mattered. In that half-dream state, my brain kept replaying the moment I saw it and swiped it away. Not because I didn't love her, but because I'd trained myself to believe love could wait. Just picture this for a moment. You can't sit up, you can't open your eyes fully, you can't even be sure what day it is, and yet you're mentally stuck on a small act of avoidance that used to feel harmless. That's what the ICU did to me. It stripped away the loud stuff, work, schedule, ego, and left me alone with the quiet truth underneath. In that inner space, time didn't behave normally. A minute could feel like an hour. A night could feel like a blink. I'd drift up toward awareness and then sink back down. Sometimes I'd hear my name, and it would hit me like a hook pulling me upward, and I'd try to respond, but my body wouldn't match my effort. It was humiliating in a deep, primal way, being conscious enough to want control but too weak to claim it. Fear didn't arrive like one big wave. It came in small, sharp stabs. Fear that I'd never stand again. Fear that I'd wake up and not recognize myself. Fear that I'd wake up and not get the chance at all. And the hardest fear wasn't the pain. It wasn't even the idea of death, because in that fog you don't think in clean sentences like, I might die. It's more animal than that. It's the sense of slipping away and not being able to grab anything solid. And then, somehow, the fear turned into regret. Not regret about missing a meeting. Not regret about money. Regret about the way I'd been living, like my life was a long hallway with endless doors, like I could always circle back later and open the ones I ignored. My mom's voice became a symbol in my head, even without the sound. Her patience, her habit of checking on me, the way she'd ask small questions because she didn't want to pressure me into a real conversation. The way she'd say, call me when you have a second, as if my time was the most precious thing in the world. And there I was, laid out in a place where people measured your worth by oxygen levels and numbers on screens, realizing I'd been spending my days like those numbers were the only ones that mattered. Have you ever realized, too late, that you were treating people like background music? Like something comforting you didn't actually listen to? That's what hit me, over and over, in that drugged, sterile darkness. The strangest part is that my brain didn't show me dramatic life flashbacks. It showed me ordinary moments I'd overlooked. My mom standing in her kitchen, probably making coffee, calling me because she had a thought about me. My dad sitting in his living room with the TV too loud, sending me a weather warning because that's how he says, I love you, without sounding emotional. My own apartment, quiet, clean, empty, waiting for me like a hotel I pretended was a home. And I felt this deep, aching clarity that I hadn't earned. Like I was being handed a lesson in the most brutal classroom possible. I kept thinking, if I get out of this, I'm not doing that anymore. Not the driving, not the sales, those were just jobs. I meant the deeper thing. The habit of postponing love. The reflex to treat human connection like an errand you can reschedule. I wanted to promise it to someone. I wanted to say it out loud. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't even open my eyes properly. All I could do was lie there with the beeps and the hum and that one unanswered voicemail sitting in my mind like an unopened door. And in that quiet, I finally understood something that would have sounded corny to me a week earlier. Love doesn't wait for your calendar to clear. When I finally came up for real, when the fog thinned enough that I could tell I was awake, I didn't feel grateful right away. I felt confused, irritated, and embarrassingly helpless, like I'd been dropped into someone else's life without instructions. The first thing that hit me was the light. Hospital light isn't normal light. It's too bright and too steady, like it's designed to eliminate shadows so nobody can hide from what's happening. My eyes burned, and when I tried to squint, my face barely moved. My mouth was dry in a way that felt ancient, like I'd been chewing dust for days. The air smelled clean and sharp, and under it there was that constant hint of plastic and disinfectant. I tried to sit up, and pain answered immediately. Not a heroic kind of pain, not something you grit your teeth through, but a deep, full-body stop that made my breath catch. My instinct was to push through it the way I pushed through long drives in bad weather, but my body didn't negotiate. It just shut me down. I turned my head slowly, and that's when I saw my dad. He was sitting in one of those stiff hospital chairs that look like they were designed by someone who's never had to wait for news. His posture was slumped forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was holding himself together. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not physically. He's still the same guy, broad shoulders, weathered hands. But something about him had been compressed by fear and exhaustion. When he realized my eyes were open, he didn't do some big emotional performance. He just stood up fast, like his body moved before his mind caught up, and he stared at me with this expression I still can't fully describe. Relief was part of it. Shock too. But under that, there was something rawer, like he'd been bracing for a different ending and hadn't allowed himself to imagine this moment. I tried to talk. My throat protested. The sound that came out of me was thin and useless, and the frustration hit me immediately because my whole adult life had been built on competence, on sounding confident, on controlling the conversation, on being the guy who has an answer. My dad leaned closer and told me, softly, to take it easy. His voice had that careful tone people use around something fragile. A nurse came in not long after, Quiet footsteps, calm face, practiced hands. And she spoke to me like I was someone who needed permission to do basic things. She told me to focus on breathing. She told me not to strain. She told me I was safe. Safe. That word felt strange because I didn't feel safe. I felt like my body had betrayed me. I felt like the world had proven how fast it could flip. And then, like it had been waiting behind everything else, the thought came back, sharp as a pin. My phone. I tried to lift my hand, and it moved, but slowly, like it was pushing through water. I managed to croak out a question, half-formed, about my phone. I didn't even say why. I just needed it in the way an addict needs proof the supply still exists. The nurse didn't scold me. She didn't act annoyed. She just looked at me with this kind, firm patience and said I needed to focus on my breathing and rest. She said there would be time for that later. Time. That word landed differently now. Because lying there, seeing my dad's face, feeling how hard it was just to inhale without pain, I realized how ridiculous my old priorities were. I'd treated time like an endless resource, like something I could always borrow against. But in that room, time wasn't theoretical. Time was measured in breaths, in heartbeats, in the tiny rise and fall of my chest. Have you ever watched someone you love try to stay strong and fail just a little? Because my dad's eyes got glossy, and he turned his head like he didn't want me to see it. And in that small movement, I felt something crack open in me. I wanted to tell him I was sorry. Not sorry for crashing, not sorry for the inconvenience, but sorry for every time I'd made him and my mom feel like they were a lower priority than my schedule. My dad cleared his throat, sat back down, and said something I'd never heard from him in a hospital-quiet voice. He said he was glad I was still here. And for the first time since the accident, I didn't feel like a sales rep who'd lost control of his day. I felt like a son. I used to think recovery meant getting back to who you were. Like your body repairs itself. You hit the gym, you get your stamina back, and then life slides into its old grooves like nothing happened. That isn't what it felt like. Recovery felt like learning a new language in a body I didn't fully trust anymore. It felt like being proud of things I used to consider embarrassing, standing up without dizziness, walking 10 steps without needing to sit, taking a shower, and not feeling like I'd run a marathon. The first time I put my feet on the floor beside the hospital bed, the cold shocked me so hard my eyes filled up, not because the floor was cold, but because it was real. It meant I was still here. It meant gravity still wanted me. And that's when the tears came, quiet, confusing, almost angry tears, because I wasn't crying from triumph the way I expected. I was crying from the sudden understanding of how close I'd been to never feeling something as simple as a cold floor again. Rehab was slow, unglamorous work. It was repetition and patience, two things my old life didn't respect. My muscles shook doing basic movements. My lungs felt like they were relearning their job. I would get tired in a way that didn't match my pride, and that mismatch messed with my head more than the physical pain did. Then there was the other part nobody warns you about, the fear that follows you home. When I finally left the hospital and the world went back to normal speeds, my nervous system didn't. My first ride in a car as a passenger made my palms sweat so badly I had to wipe them on my jeans. Every brake light felt like a threat. Every wet patch of pavement made my chest tighten. My brain kept replaying the moment traction disappeared, like it was trying to keep me safe by never letting me forget. People would say, "You must feel so grateful," and I'd nod, because it was easier than explaining that gratitude and anxiety can live in the same body at the same time. I was grateful, yes, but I was also jumpy, irritable, ashamed of how fragile I felt. The old version of me would have called it weakness and tried to outwork it. I couldn't outwork it. What changed me wasn't one big inspirational moment. It was a collection of small, quiet decisions that felt almost boring compared to the dramatic event that caused them. I started returning calls the same day. Not in a performative way, not with some grand speech, just with simple presence. If my mom called, I didn't let it ring out while I told myself I'd handle it later. I pulled over. I answered. If I couldn't talk, I texted real words instead of a thumbs up. I asked her how she was doing and actually waited for the answer. I started going to dinner at my parents' house more often, even when it was inconvenient, even when it meant my week wasn't optimized. I sat at their table and noticed details I'd ignored for years. The worn spot on my dad's favorite chair arm, the way my mom rinsed dishes as she talked, the sound of their house settling at night. It was ordinary, and it felt like a miracle. I drove less. At first because I had to, because the fear was real and my body wasn't ready. But later because I began to see how much of my old driving was just running. I found a role closer to home, still sales-related, but not built on constant highways. It paid a little less, and for the first time in my life, I didn't take that as an insult. I took it as a trade I was finally willing to make. And yes, I listened to the voicemail. Not in the hospital. Not right away. I waited until I was home, sitting alone on my couch, phone in my hand, the room quiet enough that I could actually hear what mattered. Before I pressed play, I just held the phone there for a long time, because part of me was afraid it would be nothing, just a normal check-in, and that would somehow make my regret feel even worse. Part of me was afraid it would be something important, and I'd have to live with the fact that I almost missed it forever. Have you ever hovered over something small and realized it might change you? That's what that moment felt like. When I finally hit play, my mom's voice filled the room, warm, familiar, slightly tired, and the message wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a secret or a crisis. It was love, delivered in the plain language of someone who doesn't know they're giving you the most important thing in the world. She said she'd been thinking about me. She said the weather looked bad, and she wanted me to be careful. And then she said, almost casually, that she loved me. No big speech. No guilt. Just a mother reminding her son he mattered. I sat there with the phone against my ear, and I realized my whole busy identity had been built on the idea that love would always be waiting in the background like a song you can replay later. But you don't always get later. I still drive sometimes, and I still have days where my old instincts show up, the urge to rush, to multitask, to treat life like a checklist I can conquer if I move fast enough. I don't pretend the crash turned me into a perfect person. It just made me honest about what I was doing to myself and what I was quietly doing to the people who loved me. Because here's the truth I didn't understand at 29. The people who care about you aren't asking for a grand performance. They're asking for your presence. They're asking for the basic courtesy of being treated like they matter now, not when your schedule finally opens up. If you've ever ignored a call and thought, I'll get it later, I'm not judging you. I'm telling you I lived in that sentence. I built a whole personality around it. And then I woke up under hospital lights, trying to remember how to breathe, with my dad sitting beside me looking like he'd aged 10 years in a week. Just picture your own phone for a second. Picture the name you keep meaning to answer. The person you assume will always be there. The message you keep postponing because your day feels urgent. What would it cost you to stop and respond today? Because love doesn't wait for your calendar to clear. Love doesn't care about your deadlines. Love shows up in small voices and simple words and ordinary nights at a kitchen table. And if you still have the chance to hear that voice, to say something kind back, to show up while you can, don't leave it for later.